Hi, I'm John Dickinson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts. Tonight we're going to be running another of our expert talks, and the format will be the talk from Reda, and I'll say a little more about that in a second. And then we're going to, it's about a half-hour talk, so we're going to run Fishbowl again at the end of the talk. So a fishbowl, for people who haven't experienced it before, is where we have a rotating, revolving set of panelists, and we have got a few people nominated to start us off when we do start. But what we'll do is, if you ask questions at the end of the talk in the Q&A section, we will use those questions and then vote on them, and we'll use those questions to feed into the panel. The panel will, there'll only be 4 people on the panel at a time, but anybody from the audience that wants to join the panel, please put your hand up. So there's a raise hand feature. And then Sheila, who is watching in the background, will be able to bring you in as a panelist, and we will remove somebody from the panel. And Sheila, it will be the person that has spoken the longest ago. It's been the longest time since they spoke. If anybody, when you're on the panel, if you want Sheila to remove you next, then you can just put that in the chat to panelists. Sheila will see it, and you'll be the next one to be booted out of the panel. And that way, hopefully, we can get a good revolving conversation. But we aren't setting a question ourselves. We'll take them from the audience. We find that works the most. It leads to the best conversation, the most fluid conversation. Okay, so that is what we're going to be doing. That's how it's run. So tonight we are joined by Reda Hmeid. He is an architect, solution enterprise, and all software and all varieties of architect with Equal, and we're working with Equal Experts. And his talk tonight is going to be on building software is not the same as making a chicken sandwich. And I did read up on Reda's blog post beforehand, and which was really illuminating. And it's all around. Well, I won't spoil it. Actually, I'll let Reda explain why chicken sandwiches and software are related. So with that, I am going to hand over to Reda. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. I'll just share screen now and then get started. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that on their screen. I'm assuming yes, because I can see it as well. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for turning up and listening to me and listening to some of my musings. This is, as John said, about the question on build versus buy. It's an age-old debate. Throughout my whole career, it's always been something that's been talked about, and I'm sure that people come across this all the time, and it's the question that's usually asked. Hopefully, as part of this, I will change some minds, and anyone who does think building software is like making a chicken sandwich, hopefully by the end of this, you would have changed your mind and you realise that it's not. But the first thing is to understand about build versus buy. As I said, it's an age-old debate. It's almost wherever I've been, it's always cropped up. And usually when I speak to clients or work in a company, the reasons for buying over building usually come down to some common themes, usually around these ideas. More often than not, it's the question of, we're not a tech company, we're not Google, we're not Facebook, we shouldn't be building our own software. That's not core to our business. When I first started software development, I started at British Airways, and in that first year, they flipped from having their own booking system to outsourcing it to Amadeus. And the argument at the time was, we want to focus on what is core to our business, and IT is not core to our business. But 20 years later, 21 years later, that's still the argument that is often used. We don't have our own developers, which is kind of fair enough. If you don't have developers to write code, then you probably aren't going to be building software. But that doesn't mean there's not other ways, Equal Experts, for example, of building your own software. but it's something to focus on always. This can be bought off the shelf anyway. Why should we build it ourselves? It's too expensive to build our own software. I know one of the debates often had is that a software company, one that actually sells software, has to be certain that it can be sold to a critical mass of people before they even start to break even. And when you use that logic, then building it in-house for your own company probably seems to be too expensive. I think the last one is where the truth really comes into it. This is an honest appraisal, an honest description of why people often choose to buy over build. It's not usually articulated. It's not usually the statement that's usually made, but I think it's probably where a lot of the truth comes in. It's risk averseness. When it comes down to it, if you was to bring in a SAP, the leading ERP vendor in the world, or Salesforce, the leading CRM, or if you were to hire one of the big consultancy firms, at the end of it, you go back to your boss, your manager, your CTO, CEO, and this decision won't be necessarily questioned, even if it went wrong. The fact that you brought in Accenture or SAP isn't the reason. So it's a risk averseness. But a colleague gave me a new take, one that I hadn't heard before. And he mentioned that a documentary was had in America, a guy called Andy George. I hadn't heard of him before, or this documentary actually, but it was called How to Make Everything. And in one particular episode, he went about making his own chicken sandwich from scratch. So that included making his own salt, breeding his own chickens, slaughtering his own chickens, growing the wheat, turning that into flour and then to bread, importing fuel in so that he could, or importing oil so that he can turn that into fuel so that he can run his tractors. And at the end of that, per sandwich, to make a single chicken sandwich, he found would cost $1,500 and would take 6 months to make. And this was the analogy that was used to why we shouldn't be building our own software. It takes too long. It would be too complex, and it would cost too much. And if you look at buying a sandwich off the shelf, I haven't got the actual price of this, but even the meal deal, £3 for a sandwich with salad, snack, drink. It's much cheaper. It's a fraction of the cost, even if you take into account currency and exchange rates, than making it yourself. So what we should do before moving on, we should put this analogy to bed and not come back to it again, because I don't think it necessarily takes us any further. If we were to make our own salt or breed our own chickens, grow our own lettuce, etc., in our world, in the tech world, that's like us creating our own programming language or building our own database and inventing a queuing system. If we were just wanted to build a low volume 3-tier web application, we just wouldn't do it. And even when making your own sandwich, I'm not sure many people always, if they fancied a chicken sandwich, would go off to Costa or Starbucks or Waitrose and grab a sandwich. More often than not, they'll go and buy their tomato, their lettuce, and their bread with whatever condiment they prefer, and build a sandwich and make their own sandwich the way they would like. And I think that analogy is closer to what we do as software developers, because when I build software, I use the database that someone else created or a programming language that was invented by others. More often than not, almost invariably these days, you're going to use infrastructure that is built and managed by someone else. And yes, we will use software products sold by the vendors. It's not that we build only and never buy, but we bring in what we need to do and incorporate it into an application that starts to bring value out. And so this idea of build versus buy, that is a false dichotomy. we build and buy, and the debate has to start to revolve around more of that. So how do we make the decision? How do we decide when to build and when to buy? And I know quite often when I come to talks like this, I'm looking for the answer. I'm looking to be able to go, right, I'm going to go back to my boss and I'm going to explain this is what we should be doing and why. The truth is, I'm not going to give you that. What I'm going to say is, don't use a checklist. So you're not going to get a checklist or a decision tree or some sort of decision flow chart to make this decision, because it's a far more nuanced decision than a simple set of instructions which will remove the debate in future. But what I will do is start off with some principles, and these principles are general, high-level principles that I use and that I believe we should use in deciding when to custom build our software or when to buy it completely off the shelf. So always, as an organization, we should build what differentiates us, what is core to us. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about what is a differentiator. Buy what doesn't. And then there's this nuance part. Focus on delivering value early and flexibly. Reason why I say that is because even if the first two principles are put in place and you've decided that this feature that you're creating is a differentiator, therefore you should build it, you may decide that buying something off the shelf will get you to market far and bring value in quicker at this moment in time. You build it flexibly so that you can change it. I'll give you an example. Someone mentioned an organization, a retail organization, that was debating on whether to build its own shopping basket or to buy one off the shelf. And it went through, and it wasn't an easy decision, and I'm not sure, I can't remember what decision was taken in the end, but they recognized that the shopping basket is unique to them, can be a differentiator. How that shopping process online can make you different to your competitors. But it would take a year and a half to build their own shopping basket as opposed to start off buying one in. So that's where the nuanced decision making needs to come in. But even then, I would say, if you're still not sure, if it's still not clear to you, build first, then test, learn, and revisit that decision and determine then, once you've got a few more answers, which way you want to go. So here, what's the point of building your own software? Why do we do it? We know we can do it. We know that we've talked about the principle before, but what is it going to give you as a company as opposed to buying it off the shelf? The first thing is it's an opportunity to be better than your competitors by being different. I think one of the things that I recognize quite a lot is that sometimes we try to be better than our competitors or better than anyone just simply by being better without taking a more intelligent approach, which is to be different is fine as well. Examples of that you can find, I'm not sure how many people on the call are going to be as old as me, but Game Boy in the early 90s or late 80s, I can't remember when it was. It was not a high tech, it wasn't technologically an innovative product. It took old tech that was maybe 15, 20 years old and packaged it into a way that was different to what Sega or Sony were producing at the time, which were seen as being, by most measures, a superior product. But they went for a different route. Nintendo went for a different route with their Game Boy, and it was far more successful than their competitors. Building your own software allows you to do something different and therefore may well give you the edge. I think in football, if you're a fan of sport, in football, I'll always use Pep Guardiola as my exemplar. He's got the best players in the world, but it's not about simply the players. He doesn't sit there and send the 11 players on the pitch and say, just be better. He looks how to do different tactics on the day and different strategies to make him, to give him the advantage as well over his competition. This is quite relevant to where we are at the moment, the reason why we're online today. it gives you the ability to react to changing context that your business may experience. If you're building your own software, it's within your own destiny to have to look at the situation, to have situational awareness, and to understand I need to change to match my environment. If you're constrained by the software that you're using, that you've bought, if you're constrained by the software you're using, whether you've bought it or built it, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, then reacting becomes much more difficult. And this point is that you build only what you need rather than buying what you may need, and that's a common mistake. If you're going to spend a few $100,000, $1 million, couple of million on a piece of software, there is an understandable temptation to look at what features it may provide in future which you may not need at the moment. So you buy this product on the basis that you may need more than you ever do. I've seen people who've bought CMSs because they've had the ability apparently to do personalization, and I'm sure they're very good at the personalization, except the companies that have bought those, that CMS hasn't used the personalization, but that was why they bought it and why they paid the extra money, as opposed to looking at something that covered their needs now and only now. So I think these are the three main things. There's others as well, but these are the three main things from a business context that allows you to gain advantage and value from building your own software as opposed to buying it. Oh, and the only other one was the only limit is your imagination, which kind of fits into the differentiator as well. Now, I said I'd come back to it. What is a differentiator? Again, this is a fairly ambiguous term, and here is my attempt at trying to put some elements of definition around that so that we can use that in our discussions as well. I think first thing is to think of a differentiator as something that is core to your business. That's something that makes your business unique, or could make your business unique. And one way of being able to see that is if that is part of your business plan, if these features, these functionalities, something that your business relies on is in your business plan or your business strategy, then that is most probably a differentiator. I think the other thing to consider is your customers. Obviously, customers is usually what we're here for. What businesses live and die on is the whole idea of their customers. So if this is a feature or something that will bring customers to you from your competitors, or allow them to stay with you because you do it better than your customers, or they just don't do it at all, then that's probably a differentiator as well, and something that should be considered as part of building your software. I've mentioned the third point. If it generates direct revenue, now this isn't always relevant to every company. Some companies aren't about revenue. Let's say you're a government department. It's not about generating revenue, but for most companies it is about making money. So if this is something that's going to directly generate revenue for you, then it is also probably something to consider as a differentiator. Finally, if the business, and I use that term quite loosely because we're all the business, but if the business is willing to change its processes to align with any software product, then it's probably not a differentiator. Where the danger comes in is where you buy in a piece of software and change it to align with your own business processes. You customize it, and that's where the problem is. If it's a product that you look at and you think, well, to be honest with you, if it's the best product out there, we'll change our processes to align with it. For example, an HR product or something similar, then it's probably not a differentiator. So I mentioned changing context, and I'm not sure there's going to be many talks these days that doesn't plug into the whole crisis that we're living in at the moment, the pandemic. And I'm no different. I'm not any unique in that one. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic, that's changed the context that we're living in at the moment. And it's a hugely deep and broad crisis, one that we couldn't have expected, one that we couldn't have planned for. So arguably, we couldn't have delivered software that necessarily was dealing with this. But I think something to always note is that each company, the context that each company, the environment each company lives in, can have its own crisis that isn't so wide-ranging, isn't so deep, but it can prove to be just as fatal to the company. And a lot of the large companies that we've lost in the last decade, 2 decades, usually come from this inability to react to the context that they live in, and that can vary, usually because of some sort of competitor, but it can also be from other means. So we've all heard of these. Some of them still around, some of them are probably not going to be around for much longer. Woolworths, Blockbuster. Blockbuster's an interesting one. It wasn't that they didn't have the opportunity. It's well known. It's a common one that's mentioned example that Netflix went up to Blockbuster to partner with them, and Blockbuster said, that's a niche idea, I'm not interested. Netflix, around 28 billion or $30 billion company. Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. And I think I use that one as well as an example, because it's not that they didn't partner with Netflix that was the problem. There's, as we've seen, there's enough in this world for a Blockbuster and a Netflix to live side by side. The problem for Blockbuster was that it didn't react to the change that it was seeing itself in. The idea that companies people were going to start streaming videos rather than walking down the road to pick up a DVD. And they didn't react. Now, did they not react because they couldn't, or because they were too confident in the world of DVDs? Certainly, a lot of these companies that I mentioned here, and Blockbuster same, when their demise happens, it's almost invariably reported as being they haven't kept up with the technology advances of the day. And that tends to be the issue there. So the idea of building your own software will allow you, not in and of itself, but does give you the opportunity to react to whatever that crisis is that we're in at that moment in time, whether it is something like this or whether it was a far more localized crisis for the likes of Blockbuster, which was longer lasting, but proved just as fatal. Quite often, reacting to change isn't about being better than your competitors, but reacting to that change is all about survival, giving you the opportunity to last long enough to be able to come up with something different and better. And these companies are those that have not managed to, for whatever reason, over the last 20 years. I think Woolworths still exists in America and Australia. I'm not sure if it's the same Woolworths, but certainly similar. Right, same name anyway. All right, so when do you buy? As I said, it's not a build versus buy, it's a build and buy, and there are situations when you do buy. Sorry, when you do buy, you should be doing certain things. When you've decided it's not a differentiator, when you've decided it's not necessarily core to your business, what should you be doing when you do buy software? So first thing, try to advise, and it's a difficult thing to do, but try before you buy. Insist on it. Go through an exercise, not of pitches and paper exercises and check boxes to determine which is the best company, which best software to buy, because demos and pitches, they can be incredibly slick and tell you what you want to do is possible, and then when you use it, you're stuck with a long commercial agreement. So try before you buy. whether that's through an official trial or whether a lot of them use at least a trial version and build it into your software, spike it as much as possible. Don't do a simple paper exercise. I would always recommend, again, difficult, and usually when you have finance people involved, it tends to not look like the best deal, but try and avoid long-term tie-ins. No more than a year. It takes a year to understand whether the software is any good or whether you want to change. Try and go for a module-based product and only buy what you need. I think a lot of these vendors, rightly so, it's a business model that works for them, will give you a license fee for everything, which includes many things you don't need, many things you will never need. What that tends to do is force the hand when you're making architectural decisions. I've already committed to spending this much on this product. Yes, I'm only using it for this, but they already give us this effectively for free. It will be described as free. And whether that was the right architectural or technical decision to make, it tends to force the hand in that situation. So try and keep it modular as much as possible, and don't ever customize. Use the product out of the box, build any additional features around it that you may need and integrate with it. Customization ties you in long term and prevents you from upgrading, makes it very difficult to move. So avoid customization. And then, just like anything you do in-house or buy in, make sure it follows architectural standards and patterns that you define for yourself, whatever those architectural patterns are. I don't mention them here. These are just examples you may choose. But whatever it is, make sure that they can abide by those patterns as well. So when you build, consider these things. Building software in itself isn't a solution, isn't the final solution. Building the software, if you're not doing it right, isn't going to solve your problems. As I mentioned earlier on, you need to react to change. But if reacting to change is difficult because you've got a 6-week or 6-month release cycle, or reacting to change is difficult because every time you deliver software, you have to, it breaks, then you're not going to be able to react to change. So before we go down this route of we should be building, you focus on changing the way you build before that. So incorporate CI/CD. These days I don't think that's an option. When I first started, people were talking about Jenkins and CI/CD pipelines, you could argue it was possibly an option back then. I don't think it's an optional requirement, an optional thing anymore. Focus heavily on quality, good quality code. Doing things fast doesn't mean rushing, doesn't mean taking shortcuts. Focus on quality of architecture, quality of code, quality of individuals who are writing that code. As I said, as part of the CI/CD, but try and deliver often. You've got to be at a position where you're delivering as close to daily as possible. That's the ultimate, but even if you're delivering weekly, that is a good position, or every couple of weeks, that's a good position to be in. More important than how often, I guess, in a way, is that you can do it as and when needed. So if you're writing software, but you're only releasing once a week, but you're not beholden to a release schedule, then that's a pretty good position to be in. The next two, focus on user needs and focus on value. They're very interrelated. The value comes from focusing on user needs. Be driven by that, deliver what is needed and no more than that, and concentrate on delivering a product and not a tech solution. It's not about the latest tech, it's not about the best tech, it's about delivering the best product, and therefore you're going to be gaining the value from what you build, which gives you the advantage of buying in that scenario. Okay. Right, so I won't keep you much longer. So it's just some final thoughts. We've talked about this. As I've said, build versus buy, or build and buy. They're not a dichotomy. It's not a choice between them. in all scenarios. More often than not, it's about doing both. But it's also a nuanced decision. Can't get a checklist, you can't get a decision tree or a flow chart to make that decision for you. It requires discussion, it requires spiking, it requires practical experimentation to make that decision for the company. And it has to be done in the context of the company that you're working in. I didn't mention this, but I'm going to mention it now. All companies these days are tech companies. As I mentioned, there was four or five companies that have gone bust or in danger of going bust, and they all fail to recognize that they are tech companies. So I think we need to, as technologists in the software development space, we need to encourage whoever clients or companies we work for to recognize that they are tech companies. And when I said earlier on that we don't build our own database, and that is true, we don't set out to build our own database, but I would like to see a point where companies are brave enough that when one of their extremely talented developers come in and say, look, I've built a database that gives us X, Y, and Z, are you willing to push this through? Then a company, no matter who they are, will start being brave enough to back that person. As I said, building your own software in itself is not enough. You've got to do it in the right way, with the right focus, with the right things in mind to be able to do that. And then when you do buy, make sure you buy sensibly and flexibly. I think one of the things I say to a lot of people is when we focus on this question is that too often a company is beholden to the software that they buy in terms of which direction they take. I once went and saw a company that said, well, we can't do a good user experience because we're using a particular product, which I won't mention. So I said, well, why are you using that product then? Why have you stuck with that product if it doesn't allow you to provide a good user experience, which they had said to me before that was the reason why they're struggling with their online presence, because they don't have a good user experience. So don't let the direction of your company be stuck and constrained by the software. As long as it isn't, then that means you're buying sensibly, you're buying in the right way and flexibly, and that's what you need to be considering. And I think that's it. So thank you, and I think we'll move on to Fishbowl soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Reda. That was excellent. Okay, so we will move on to the Fishbowl, yes. So we've got a couple of questions in there in the Q&A. While Sheila is just bringing in the members of the Fishbowl panel, could we have a look at the questions, see if there's anything else from Reda's talk and the advice and some of the processes and the guidance he was talking about. If you've got any questions, now's the time to add them in. Of course, you can add them in while the panel's talking as well. But also take a look at the questions that are in the Q&A, upvote the ones that you think you'd like the panel to start with. Okay, great. Paul is here, so I think we're starting to bring people in. In the meantime, I am going to, and here's Katie. Hey, Katie. I am going to move back to gallery view so you can see all of us. And here is Neil. Excellent. Right. So we have everybody in the fishbowl, and Reda is in the fishbowl, and I am out. I'll be helping moderate and cajole things along if I can. Okay. So the first question we've got here, which just had a little thumbs up and an upvote, is from Louis or Louise. What do you think about Wardley maps? And I think, for a bit of context, I think this question was posted while you were talking about differentiating factors, Reda. So I'm kind of assuming it was in the context of that. But let's take that's a bit of context. Let's take the question at face value. Just in the round, what do you think about Wardley maps? So someone from the panel want to pick that up.
I'm happy to take that one initially. I follow Simon Wardley on Twitter, and I think some of the ideas that I mentioned there, um, borrowed, stolen, you know, from him. I think the idea of Wardley maps is excellent. I didn't use them in my talk, and I was tempted to do it. And the reason why I didn't use it in here was largely because I'm not confident enough in it yet. I've just been practicing, so that was Simon Wardley would argue that's the best time to share it. Yeah, so Wardley maps are very good in that sense, to be able to use this question of what is a commodity, what should we be building, and I think if you look at the way he does the maps, says if it's too far to one side, i.e. you're building everything, then you've probably got it wrong. But if it's too far the other side, where everything is a commodity, then you're probably not pushing yourself as a company well enough. So I like them, and I certainly intend to keep practicing them, but which the only reason why I didn't use them, as I said, was because of lack of confidence at the moment.
Has anybody else got experience or tried using them to identify areas of differentiation? Or actually, Reda, have you when you've been practicing with them, have you found them useful to help with that decision making around whether to buy or build?
I found them useful to communicate that. Yeah, I think one of the things it's important to be cognizant of is that we can be quite biased anyway. We've all got the bias, so having the Wardley map and be able to display it is good for communicating that decision, rather than I haven't quite managed to use it to make the decision, but it's helped in communicating for sure.
Cool. Okay. Right. So we will. I'll move on to the next question then. So, and if anybody in the audience wants to jump in, then just raise your hand, use the raise hand function, and Sheila will pick you up. So the next question we've got is from Chris Hill. So what happens? This is an awkward one. What happens when you decide to build your custom software and you realize X% way through that it might be the wrong decision? When is too late too late?
I guess you could say when the company goes under is too late. There's probably a point before then where ultimately the hardest thing about making the decision is going back on that decision if you feel it's wrong afterwards. I know a lot of people put off making the decision in case it's the wrong decision, and that can cause more harm than making the wrong decision in the first place. I mean, I like Reda's point about being able to pivot and change and stuff, and so being flexible is just as important as anything else when running a large organization, because you'll get left behind anyway. So yeah, as soon as you recognize it's a wrong decision, recognize it is, and then change your pattern from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I'd say about any decision you make, it could be wrong. So I'd flip it the other way around. What if you've agreed on a £10 million piece of software to buy, and then 2 years down the road, after you've realized that it was the wrong one? So there's always this danger. There's got to be a point where, like you said, Neil, got to be a point where you have to stop chucking money down the wrong way. But with regards to building software, you're kind of going, well, I've only built whatever I needed at that point, and then I can throw it away far more easily, rather than I've got another 3 years of this vendor license. So both, it's like anything we make, any decision. I've regretted some of my dates before, and I've turned away from that. But you make bad decisions and you fix them at some point, but you try and make them non-regrettable decisions. And I think that's where building your software can be a low regret, not no regret, but a low regret decision if you were to do it that way.
I'm just trying to think about this and thinking maybe it's never too late. Like a lot of things, it's never too late to change your mind, is it? And go a separate way. I mean, one of the principles which I think kind of stand us in good stead in software engineering have been two, which I've kind of try and live by, which is A, defer everything until you absolutely cannot live without it any longer, because then you absolutely recognize that you need that thing rather than thinking you might need it and then incurring the cost of it. And then the other one is like, you're never going to need it. So work on the basis that you're never going to need that thing. And I guess they're the same thing really, which is that when the need is absolutely clear, you'll know it and you'll know you're making the right choice. But until that, can you defer and get by until then? So yeah, but I would say maybe it's never too late to change your mind.
Cool. And there's another angle there, which is about how to validate decisions early. So if you are building bespoke software, you want to be building things and putting it into use as quickly as possible, the simplest possible thing to meet a business need, get some operational people using it, etc., get it in front of some users. If you're buying some software, and this is another thing that Reda had in his talk, it's the same thing. Get it in front of users, make it operational, put it within an operational team on a 6-month trial, and make sure it actually does fit and add and deliver some value. So both decisions, in my experience, both decisions could be wrong. You've got to validate the decision as quickly as possible, whichever way you're going.
I think another thing that you know, over time you start to learn a little bit as well is you can also apply experience to this question, and something you kind of get the benefit of after many times failing and getting it wrong, is that sometimes you just know that something you're going to do is going to require certain things, and you see it in software engineering at times where you just know you're going to need a database to do that thing. You cannot avoid that. It will be a thing. Though a lot of times you can probably get by completely without them, even though we have a lot of them around where they're not needed. So I wonder if it's also one way it's just something is about when you can apply experience to this problem, and you've seen it enough times before, you can make an informed decision down a particular route. Because I think the simplest thing that could possibly work, sometimes it would always suggest you never buy something. But if you know the roadmap, you know where you're going, you've seen this thing 3-4 times before, and 3-4 times before you end up changing horses over to the other one, maybe the 5th time, you know, you would say, okay, maybe we just go all in and buy that thing.
All right. So thank you, Chris, for the question. So the next question we've got here is from Werner Smith. So how and who is the best person to help a client come to the realization that they made a mistake? There's a lot to be said for being honest and saying we bought the wrong thing, we need to change. As with the example of the UX software, and more recently within Equal Experts, we've moved away from some software that we were using to run the business internally, and as you say, obviously it can be a touchy subject. So, yeah, who is the best person to help? And it doesn't have to be a client, just within your own organization, even to come to the realization that it's not the right thing or a mistake has been made.
I don't know who the right person would be. I think that could just be anybody who's willing to have an honest conversation. What I would say is that I try to avoid ascribing mistakes to decisions that were made. They were made in a particular context. I think it's important to, you know, as the example we had in Equal Experts, but or anywhere, is that it was a decision, it was made. As long as we can recognize it that that it was done for the right reason in the context that was made at the time, then it becomes an easier conversation because you have the metrics or the examples that show it's just not working. But that's okay. We've learned from it. This is why it's not working. Let's move on from there. It requires honesty. It is a touchy subject, especially in the world that I revolve in as a architect. Architects get very touchy about this subject, and it can feel like it's a slight on their character or their abilities, but it's not. But it just has to be had. I'm certainly not averse to having that conversation if needed, and I think we've just got to be adult about it and just recognise that getting a tiny little bit of upset may be better than the sunk cost fallacy where we just keep putting money into it. But we're all the right people, I suppose, in answering that one.
So I think there's got to be a business case element to it, and a benefits benefits case, which is the software that we've either built or bought, is it realizing the benefits case that we want to realize? And there's a couple of angles, because actually the benefits case could change as well. The software could have been perfect for the position you were in, and then you may decide actually there's another problem, there's another challenge we've got to solve now. It definitely can be a touchy subject, but Reda, I like your the example of taking away, saying it's not a mistake. There was a decision made the best decision was made at the point in time with the information that was available. Actually, we've got more information now that we have implemented something, put it into practice, and that new information means that we need to maybe make another decision. Yeah, great. So we have now got an email address. I'm not sure what the name is, so I'm gonna skip over the name. Apologies. So we've got. So you missed the start. That's great. But thanks for joining anyway. So from a dev perspective, with the most flexible method to build an in-house facade to enable plug and play with external products as much as possible. So there'll also be less painful should you get buyer's regret. I'm guessing I'm driving at a hybrid buy and build solution. So if people got experience of doing this, an in-house facade with a plug and play with external products being a good solution. And anybody from the audience, if anybody wants to put their hand up and join the panel, this is anyone's welcome to jump in on these.
I mean, I'll just start by saying I think it's a lovely idea. I mean, I think the idea that you could put some separation between you and that thing and allow you to change your mind later with minimal impact on your internal stuff would be ideal. I just don't know if it's practical, whether you basically lose all the benefit of what you're trying to achieve by doing that. People more familiar with this stuff I'd probably answer that better, but I think it's a great idea. I mean, my experience is much more about using frameworks and libraries and stuff like that rather than buying in big systems. But we always try to follow the idea that don't let that thing creep into your software and be everywhere. That thing will want to be everywhere, but try and keep it. Don't get married to it. Just date it and see how it goes. And if you want to change your mind, you should be able to do that. You need to architect that into your solution to be able to achieve that. And if you could do the same thing here, I think that would be pretty neat. But maybe doesn't work like that.
I think when I started at British Airways, that was the goal for architecture back then. This was back in '99, and so I was a brand new developer, and the goal was abstract away as much as possible. So it was they use the phrase plug and play. I do think that we've moved away from that, and like you said, Paul, is that the idea of being able to, one of two things happens. You've either abstracted away so much that the benefit of the underlying software may be lost, or actually you haven't abstracted away and it's always going to be slightly painful anyway. And that's okay. I think where we've got to, because we can make changes quicker. So again, the reason why that was a big deal way back when was because it would be 6 months before I could make a very, very simple change. I'm talking the simplest changes. Now, if it's a simple change, I can make it within a day. So we shouldn't be as frightened of change. And so while, like you said, it's a good idea, and it is a hybrid anyway, as I said in the talk, actually, you build and you buy. It's just that I would, as an architect these days, I wouldn't be so hung up about abstracting away from this underlying software that I've bought in. I would just accept it. I've made the decision. It's the best software out there for my needs at this moment in time. Therefore, I'm going to go all in, because if I don't, then I'm not really getting the benefit, like you said. So I think that would be the approach I tend to take.
Yeah, I've certainly been involved in a lot of projects where it's not quite this question, but it's we've got this lump of software and we've got this lump of software and we want them to talk to each other. And can we integrate the two as if they're one system designed to work to each other, which, you know, depends on the software, makes that easier or hard. But this question is almost phrased as if you want a front of house or some sort of portal in order to get to the gubbins. And yeah, like Paul and Reda says, once you put a front end on it, it does make it easier and a consistent use for your users, perhaps. But then you might be missing out on lots of features that you're paying for because you've bought a product.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks for that question. And then actually the last one we've got here, and we will make this the last one, even if someone gets inspiration and drops something in, because we've only got 5 minutes left. And so Alexander is saying, I saw a company I used to work with that had one key indicator one of the key indicators being the size of the external party, so the size of the company that you're buying the software from. If it's too big, then you can't whip them and get them to make custom changes to it, or let's say influence. And if they're too small, then your manager might not buy into the risk. But he thinks there's a trade-off if you don't have in-house devs to find small vendors. So any advice on how to manage the risk in these cases?
I could take that one bit on that question that I'll be that answer first of all is if they're too big, we can't get them to customize the software. I think that's something to avoid anyway. So if it's software, don't try and customize it. That avoids that risk anyway, and that should be the focus of any company. If they're too, I mean, I think it's an interesting one in terms of picking a software based on what the company size is. I think that requires all manner of influence and that requires all manner of discussion, because I don't think that would ever be the right way to go, to be honest with you. You pick the software for the quality of the software. There is elements of size, you know, you want to make sure that they're still going to be around in 5 years' time to support your software. That's valid. But if it's a small, well-established company, that wouldn't come into the reckoning, personally, for me, ever, when making those decisions.
I was going to say, I didn't think it was going to make a difference, because if they're any good, they'll get bought by one of the big boys anyway. So, you know, you'll be back where you started.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I mean, when I was probably not a particularly interesting question, but I was thinking, when is too small? How do you kind of, you know, figure that out? I mean, you have new stuff coming onto the market, probably from small companies. Might be bleeding edge. It might be the best looking stuff out there. And sometimes a lot of excitement about using something new, but it would be a new thing. And then I think that's a trickier one to make a decision about on that. I don't know, Reda or Neil, anybody got a thought on, you know, jumping in early when those new companies come out with some exciting stuff for you to use?
I'm probably a little bit risk averse in most of the clients that I work with, in that I try to avoid bleeding edge, because I tend to work for fairly established clients who are large enterprise organizations. I think just get them onto you know, tech that's at least 5 years old, you know, is an achievement. So you know, so risking real bleeding edge tends to not be something I would consider in most scenarios.
It's not a problem you come across, I guess.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Although, as a counter argument, surely developing your own software is bleeding edge.
Yes, no, that's true. That is an interesting point. Yeah.
I thought of it like that.
No, yeah.
That's your own. Yes, that sounds good. So I think, well, we're just about to finish up, but Werner has got his hand up, so I'm going to promote you to a panelist, Werner, because it's nice to get some rotation on the panel. You should be joining any second now.
Hello.
Hello. Hey.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Hi, Werner.
I just wanted to add something about the concept of whether you go with big and small, and especially whipping someone into shape. Before I joined Equal Experts, I was the CTO for a startup in South Africa, a small tech company, and we dealt with large clients, guys like PCCW, and it is a reality. They will whip you into shape when you're smaller than them. But when you're on the other side of that question of whether to go with someone large or small, I think a lot of it has to do also with your appetite for risk. How much risk can I take on going with a small company? And a lot of times you also have to think about the ecosystem you're creating, because if I do go with a small company and I could be their break that makes their software something better than it is. So starting to see it more of a partnership where you're getting good software and you have that relationship where you have almost immediate feedback. The features you want get developed first because you are basically one of their biggest clients or one of their most influential clients. And that's something that a lot of companies, maybe now specifically under the conditions we're living, don't have a lot of appetite for that. But there is definitely room for that kind of conversation to take place to say, well, can I afford to make a mistake on these guys? And if I can, maybe it's a good idea to do it. And the same goes for going with a large company. I mean, if you were to walk into one of the large conglomerate software providers, you need to know what you're getting involved in, because a lot of them, once they're in, you can't get them out. You become extremely reliant on them. Every single thing you do has to go through a vetting process, and now it's a new module, and it's 4 months of development, and it's another contract. And it's very much designed, or a lot of the decision, I think, can be made based on appetite for risk. How much risk can I actually take?
That's great. And that is a fabulous comment to end on. I love the partnership element. Look for organizations or suppliers that can act like partners. Very apt. Excellent.
We try
Right.
our very best.
Brilliant. Well, we will wrap it up there. So thank you very much for the talk, Reda. Thank you, everybody that joined the panel. So Paul, Neil, Werner, Katie, and also thank you, everybody, for those excellent questions. They got the juices going, so that's brilliant. We will finish it there. We will be back the same time next week, 6 p.m. I think we have got one of our colleagues in Portugal talking about home working. And then after that, we are into a month of continuous delivery. The month of June, we're focusing on continuous delivery talks, and Dave Farley will be kicking us off with that. So thank you very much, everybody. It's great to see you. We'll see you again next time.